Experiences can be a great tool for children to reflect and learn from, whether outdoors or indoors. What are practical projects teachers and parents can do with young people? Sara Segar runs the Experiential Learning Depot out of Minnesota, where she offers courses and resources on the subject for parents and teachers. She founded the organisation when she realised there was a desire for hands-on, authentic learning at home and in the classroom, but not much material to help with that. Sara, thanks for making time. Welcome.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Am I pronouncing your name correctly, by the way? Are you a Sara or a
Yeah,
Sara?
Sarah. Yep,
You're a
Sara
Sara.
Segar.
Great. Look, the principles behind experiential learning, and at one level it's very simple. Kids learn from doing things, planning and doing things. It goes a little bit deeper in some of the theory. What's the sort of key aspects of this kind of activity and this kind of learning?
Yeah, I think experiential learning by doing and having experiences is a big part of experiential learning, but there's more to it. So, yes, we all have experiences, but we learn through doing, reflecting, conceptualizing, applying what we've experienced and observed to life or to other concepts. And it kind of repeats through this cycle of experiential learning. So, there is more than just experience, there's more than just doing. There is the deeper learning really comes in that reflection and application of what the experience was, and that's where growth and real deep learning happens.
So give us an example of this in practice, if you would, going through the stages of a particular, we'll call it a project or, an undertaking. Talk us through one.
Yeah. So I would say I wouldn't necessarily, when I teach, so I'm a high school teacher and I have two young kids at home. And when I do experiential learning with my kids, I don't necessarily plan experiences around this cycle. I use it as a reference and it's a wonderful tool and it's a real way to look back at an experience to see whether it was experiential, if it went through these phases, if it went through this cycle. But I also really like to, in practice, so in my classroom and with my own kids, make sure that these experiences have purpose. So when your kids ask, why am I doing this? There's a purpose, there's an answer, and it's real world. Students are, or children, kids at home are actively involved rather than passively receiving information. It's student centered, it's inquiry based, but a really big piece of it is that reflection component. So when my kids do experiential learning, they really include a lot of these elements more than the cycle in my experience or in practice. So some examples could be simply planning a budget-friendly family dinner, like they could plan, make a menu, cook, and host, versus doing, a budget worksheet. They could design a compost system for the school or the home, plan a trip, family creating a neighborhood guidebook, doing a pollinator garden, spotting something curious in nature and investigating and experimenting with it. So these are all examples of experiential learning at play, and all of which my own children at home have done.
Can we talk about some of them then? Let's give people a little bit of a hint of some of what you've already done the hard yards on, I guess, which is coming up with some ideas and different ways of going through this. It obviously differs from age to age. Can we start with some of those younger kids? My first observation is that they're darn good at playing. They're better than we are.
Yes.
And that play
Yes.
is their work and their learning. At what age might you want to bring a bit of structure into what kids are doing, or, bring in this idea of reflection? How early, Sara?
Yeah, I would say it's never too early. I think experiential learning really crosses age groups, skill levels, learning environments. Like anyone can do it because it is really a process more than it is content or a subject or a learning approach. It's a method of, it's a framework. So anyone can do it. I have been doing experiential learning with my own children since they were about 3. if I could take an example, one example that both my young kids have done and my high school students have done is this pollinator garden concept. So it actually didn't start with my own kid as a pollinator garden concept. That was never the end goal. My 5-year-old was really interested in entomology, so just really into bugs and insects, and he was collecting insects and preserving them and labeling them, and then discovered just through this practice and through observation and asking questions that what he was really interested in were butterflies and bees, so specifically pollinators. So we got onto this citizen science program called Bumblebee Watch. So my kid was able to go out and identify bees and take photos of them and put them on this citizen science project. And then that turned into him being interested in maybe designing and creating his own garden in our boulevard. So we designed that, we did tons of research, went to the library, talked to ecologists, went to talk to a horticulturist, and ended up designing a pollinator garden for our front boulevard, and actually made it. My high school students have done a similar concept. The difference, I would say, between a younger kid, like a 5-year-old, versus a high school student or a middle school student is not necessarily the content or the concepts, which it could be very different between those age groups depending on what they're interested in. But the real difference, I think, is how it's scaffolded, how much independence and self-direction. So with my own young kids at home, I was quite involved in this experience. But for all ages across the board, it really is so student-centered. It's very child-led, and I'm the facilitator and the coach and the mentor in all of this.
How do you help with the reflection side of things? Is it about asking good open questions? How and where have you encouraged that part of the process, wherever it comes? And again, at what age do you perhaps need to prompt more than when they've been doing this a while and do it automatically?
Yeah, I think it needs to be probably prompted for a lot of ages, including my high school students. But I think that reflection can come and go throughout the entire process. So they may have this experience like collecting bugs, and then, really kind of casually, I might ask them to talk about it with me. What are they noticing? What are they observing? How could they learn more about this? That is a form of reflection, us just kind of casually chatting about it. They might reflect at the end of an experience when maybe they've completed a project and they are looking back at it and how the whole experience applies to life, to their own lives, or to another concept that they're interested in. So reflection can really be sprinkled in throughout, and it can be through casual conversation. It could be discussion between your kids. It doesn't even have to be between you and your child. It could be written reflection where they just write down, journal their thoughts. So yeah, it can come in a lot of forms, and I think any age can and should be reflecting. And a lot of times it really just comes naturally. They just do it and doesn't necessarily need to be planned or prompted.
If you're hoping to encourage the development or an interest in developing some skills, let's say STEM skills, right? Science, tech, and maths and engineering, and a lot will say STEAM these days. I'll put the arts in there as well. But you're wanting to get kids, perhaps at a certain age, interested, whether it's at school or at home, interested in those STEM subjects. Could you give an example of how you as parent or you as teacher might begin the process they go through?
How I might begin the process of them being interested in STEAM
a project,
related.
developing a project, or developing, setting them on, I guess, a bit of a project that would perhaps involve those particular skills.
Yeah, so I think a lot of skills that are involved in STEAM are our problem solving and creativity. And so I would maybe start by asking them to identify a problem. Let's say, I mean, my brain automatically goes to science, so I'm going to give a science example because my background and first career was actually in environmental science. So I might say, let's talk about the issue of invasive species. Invasive species are a big community problem. Experiential learning is quite real world and community based and place based. So I might suggest that they do some research and dive into what invasive species issues are local, and then maybe to develop a tool through engineering and then trial and error and testing and discussion and reflection to then come up with an actual tool to maybe eliminate or mitigate the issue of the invasive species. So that is an example of something I might do with my high school students. I think that any experiential learning in general really leaves rooms for mistakes. So just really trying to encourage this growth mindset. So design thinking and problem-based learning challenges and these types of things that might focus on a science concept or technology or any sort of STEAM related engineering, problem solving, all of these skills can come in with the experiential learning cycle because they're sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to pick up on your point about leaving room for mistakes. This is vital, isn't it? It's the old Carol Dweck approach. Don't tell them they're the brightest. Tell them that you admire how bright they are. Tell them you admire how persistent they are. And perhaps give that example again if they are in a project, whether it's solo or whether it's as a group, how you come at the issue of something not working and then what to do next.
Yeah, well, because experiential learning is so student-centered and inquiry-based, and the high school that I worked at for as long as I did was interest-based, project-based learning. So a lot of my time and my role as a facilitator is kind of weeding out from the kids what they're interested in, what is relevant in their lives, what's important to them. And so, an example of an interest-based project that my own kids did was I asked what they're interested in, or a lot of times these conversations come up just organically, and I kind of launch from that. But if I'm trying to figure out what is relevant in their lives, what's meaningful, what's something that has purpose that they would enjoy or find meaning in tackling, it's really just a lot of discussion. Or sometimes it might just be something that was said, or we have an experience like we watch a documentary and kids are wondering about this one particular thing that happened in the documentary. A lot of times it really just is organic conversation, trying to weed out what is important to them, what has purpose in their lives, what's relevant, what are they interested in, and then going from there.
You have, however, put together a lot of resources on different topics, everything from 21st century skill building through to dinner party on a budget, through to, some specific resources on water pollution, for example. So there is some structure, clearly there's some demand for some structure from teachers and others who are wanting to embrace this, or, as we said, parents at home who are wanting to embrace it. There is some structure that can be brought to the start of the process at least, yeah?
Yes, for sure. I think that, like I said, I worked at a project-based school for quite some time. So that's an example of a structured way, I believe, to incorporate experiential learning. So experiential learning, like I said, is this cycle and it includes these elements, but the structure to me comes in with these different types of learning experiences like project-based learning that has a fairly direct framework, and that is really helpful for young people and kids with executive functioning challenges. And some teachers really thrive better with more structure. And so they're all, experiential learning is kind of this umbrella. And a lot of the resources that you just said are activities that that go through the cycle, that meet some of these elements that I talked about, but also have a framework involved.
I'm sure parents would appreciate that as well when they're trying to think of some ideas to get their kids busy at home on something other than a device, hopefully, some of the time anyway. Thank you, or using that device for a purpose. Thank you so much. That is Sara Segar, who runs the Experiential Learning Depot out of Minnesota in the United States.